Welcome in to the Rockies Insider. I am your host, Patrick Lyons, and on today's show, we've got some unfortunate non-tender news, the end of an era, and a little bit of MVP voting to recap from the end of last week. But we start the show with Brendan Rodgers. After 10 seasons with the Colorado Rockies organization, the Brendan Rodgers era is over. Both B-Rod and Cal Quantrill non-tendered at Friday's non-tender deadline. Anyone who is not non-tendered basically will be tendered a contract for the 2025 season. These are basically players who have not yet reached free agency and are within their arbitration window between 3 and 5+ years of service time. And while we knew that the Colorado Rockies had a lot of interest in cutting payroll via trades of Brendan Rodgers, Austin Gomber, Cal Quantrill, Justin Lawrence, another name that's been floated out there, Ryan McMahon. That's another possible trade chip that could be revisited this offseason. We knew that they wanted to bring payroll down just a little bit, but we assumed it was going to be via trade. We assumed that the Rockies would get something back for their trade assets, something back for two players who are still very talented big leaguers. And yet, here we are in November, 2 weeks exactly before the start of the winter meetings, and the Rockies once again get nothing for their trade asset. Conversely, Lucas Gilbreth, Sam Hilliard, they both agreed to a 1-year deal in order to avoid arbitration. Anytime you hear about a guy who's a Rocky and he signs a 1-year deal in the offseason, that's just a formality where the player and the team will not be going to arbitration. Justin Lawrence and Austin Gomber and Ryan Feltner, they both have not agreed to deals yet for 2025. So that's something that they can certainly work out. Or should both player and team decide that they do want to go to arbitration, they have to go through that sometimes messy process. Either the player gets the dollar amount that he thinks he's worth, or the team pays the price that they think the player is worth. But nevertheless, B-Rod and Cal Quantrill, non-tendered. They are now both free agents. And again, this was, I think, really surprising. In the aftermath, you go, okay, I guess they've made the really tough decision, especially in the wake of the fact that we know that Kyle Farmer has now signed a 1-year deal with a mutual option for 2026. So Kyle Farmer, more likely than not, going to supplant Brendan Rodgers at second base for 2025 with the guaranteed money he's going to make between next season and his buyout. At worst, he's going to get a buyout. Rockies will only be saving about $2 million by getting rid of Brendan Rodgers and going with Kyle Farmer. And for teams that are trying to slash payroll, that $2 million can be very valuable. I've mentioned this before, that there is no middle class in baseball anymore. It really seems like that doesn't exist, especially when you get to these non-tender deadlines. Players that reach free agency, the big superstars, even the not so superstar players, but the guys who have reached free agency and have a ton of value, those guys get paid really well. But everybody else gets lumped down because there are always cheaper options, especially when a player reaches their 3rd year of arbitration, as is the case with both Brendan Rodgers and Cal Quantrill. What's going on in the chat? Appreciate you guys jumping in there. Let's talk about some of the other players. We're going to talk plenty about Brendan Rodgers, but for anyone that was surprised and said, oh man, this was an awful choice on November 22nd. On November 22nd, I will say this, the Rockies did what was best for them on November 22nd. If we're talking about what the Rockies should have done in July of this past year, or June of this past year, or right after 2022, when the value of Brendan Rodgers was essentially at its peak, those are different conversations. Those are conversations that the Rockies definitely need to learn from. But as of November 22nd, when the decision was made, Brendan Rodgers going to make it probably about $5.5 million through the arbitration process. That was more than the Rockies were willing to spend. And that is why Brendan Rodgers got non-tendered. It's why Griffin Canning from Atlanta, who was just acquired in a trade from the Angels for Jorge Soler. Ultimately, Atlanta was able to get Jorge Soler's contract off the books. That was more important to them. Soler was guaranteed money. I want to say the number was $32 million over the next 2 years. And now they don't have to pay anything because they acquired Griffin Canning. They've non-tendered him, and now they do not have to pay his contract. So they got Jorge Soler's contract off the books. That was a success for them. Much bigger contract than what we're talking about here with Quantrill and Rodgers. Cubs, non-tendered Nick Madrigal. And Mike Tauchman, former Rocky Mike Tauchman, despite the fact that he had .357 on-base percentage. Connor Joe, another former Rocky, non-tendered. The Dodgers, non-tendered Brent Honeywell Jr., 2.63 ERA in 34 2/3 innings pitched this past year. Was important for them in their run to winning the World Series in 2024, and yet non-tendered. Tampa Bay Rays, non-tendered Dylan Carlson, a former top 100 prospect for the St. Louis Cardinals. He was set to make about $2.7 million, and for any team, not just a small market club like the Tampa Bay Rays, or at least how they operate like a small market club, $2.7 million is notable. Granted, league minimum is about $750,000, so that's under $2 million they save by cutting ties with Dylan Carlson. And the Cardinals do a good job to trade Carlson in July and get something for him. It wasn't a lot. It was a relief pitcher that ultimately didn't pan out for them, but they were able to get something that they needed at a time in which they were actually pushing for a postseason spot. Yankees, the $300 million Yankees, they're paying a lot for their payroll, but they're not going to pay John Birdie that $3.8 million he was estimated to make in arbitration. John Birdie, a guy who led the National League in steals, 41 in 2022. He's also 34 years old. Tim Meza on the Yankees postseason roster. They used him in every round. 3 appearances, no runs allowed. But $4 million in 2024 is too steep. And now with a guy like Tim Meza on the market, possibly ready to make $2.5–3 million, if you've got yourself a guy making $6 million, well, now all of a sudden you can get Tim Meza for a cheaper price. And that's really what the Rockies did. They said, you know what? We feel like we can get the same production offensively and defensively from Kyle Farmer as we can from Brendan Rodgers. Rodgers, I think, has a much better upside. And maybe you could play the game of, hey, we hold on to him for the first 3+ months of the season and then we trade him. But they've tried doing that dance, and they unfortunately just can't make those kind of deals. Patrick Sandoval, out for all of 2025 with Tommy John surgery, non-tendered by the Angels. There was a different time in which Colorado, when they weren't slashing payroll like right now, Sandoval would have been a real interesting target to sign to a 2-3 year deal, similar to the agreement that they came together with Herman Marquez when he needed Tommy John surgery, where if he goes out into free agency, it's not a good situation for him. Rockies could use the depth. Rockies could buy low on a pitcher who's been sneaky good like a Patrick Sandoval, but they're trying to save money right now, so that won't be happening. And a couple closers also non-tendered. Jordan Romano of the Blue Jays, he was an all-star 2 consecutive years in 2022, 2023. From 21 to 23, 96 saves. It was not good this past year. Had an ERA north of 6. Set to make about $8 million in his final year of arbitration. And then Kyle Finnegan, who was an all-star just this past summer. 38 saves, set to make also about $8 million in arbitration. Too rich for the Nationals' blood. And because I'm nothing if not consistent, I would say Mike Rizzo of the Washington Nationals did a poor job at the trade deadline in July. Because when you know that Kyle Finnegan is going to be making upwards of $8 million in arbitration, and you don't want to keep his contract around because you're either trying to slash payroll or free up payroll to make moves in free agency. The Nationals are probably getting to that point where they're going to be buyers again with their young roster, getting a little bit older, getting a little bit better. Mike Rizzo should have seen that Kyle Finnegan was not in the plans for 2025. And if he was not in the plans for 2025 in July, in June, things that Mike Rizzo should have known when they reported the camp in February, then Kyle Finnegan should have been traded. If he's playing hardball and Rizzo says, this is the asking price, if you don't meet it, we won't trade him. Sometimes you play that game. Sometimes you have to stick to your guns in that way when negotiating. But if you do that every single time and you never pull the trigger, you're just hurting yourself. You're shooting yourself in the foot is what you're doing. And so the Nationals did not make a deal. They did not trade Kyle Finnegan. So now a guy who was an all-star in 2024 is off your roster, and you got nothing for him. And he wasn't supposed to be a free agent, but he is now because you non-tendered him. Someone did something wrong in the Nationals front office. And that's where we're at now with Brendan Rodgers. 10 years in the organization, drafted 3rd overall in 2015 as a shortstop at a Lake Mary High School in Florida. Keep in mind, and this is something that I forget from time to time because it's kind of a footnote. We're going to talk about if it's fair or not to say Brendan Rodgers was a bust as a draft pick. I'll tell you right now, he wasn't. He was not a bust at all. I'll back that up here in just a second. But because Rodgers worked out okay, I would say, okay, there's a lot of people out there disappointed in Brendan Rodgers and what the Rockies ended up getting for that 3rd overall pick, because there was a lot of hype. There was a lot of hope. A lot of that hype and hope created by the Rockies. But I'll say that the thing that gets forgotten in the annals of time is that the Rockies should have had the 2nd overall pick in 2015. They were bad. They thought that they were contenders. They thought they were relevant. They were not. They got outclassed by both the Astros and the Cubs, who intentionally tanked and were intentionally bad and benefited from it. I've said this before. Over a 4-year period from 2012 to 2015, the Rockies only lost, or rather, the Rockies only won one more game. They lost one less game than the Cubs, who were intentionally trying to be bad from 2011 to 2014. So 2 4-year periods right next to each other, not identical, but right next to each other. The Cubs benefited greatly by planning to be bad, and they reaped the rewards. They reaped the benefits by winning the World Series in 2016. And the Rockies did not. So the Rockies had the 2nd worst record in all of baseball in 2014. And they should have the 2nd overall pick. Why didn't they? Well, in 2014, the Astros selected Brady Aiken with the 1st overall pick. And when they could not come to an agreement, and Aiken did not sign with the Astros, that meant the Astros got that pick back +1. So the 1st overall pick in 2014 became the 2nd overall pick in 2015. I don't think that's part of the new CBA. We've had 2 CBAs since then, but I don't think they do that anymore. If you don't sign a guy, too bad, so sad. But there was a time in which if you drafted a player and you didn't sign him in some of the early rounds, you got that pick back +1. So basically you couldn't have the 1st overall pick in back-to-back years because you didn't like the guy the first year and you really wanted to save your pick for the next year, right? It would be like if the Guardians said, we don't want Travis Bazzana. We would rather get Ethan Holiday. So we're going to draft a guy 1st overall, not sign him, and then we get that 1st overall pick back the next year. No. So because Brady Aiken didn't sign, The Astros got the 2nd overall pick, and the Rockies got the 3rd overall pick. The Astros took Alex Bregman. Alex Bregman, Colorado Rocky. He's from Albuquerque. He's from the area. What if? What if? Now, Rodgers, his career, look, he had a lot of success in the minors. Twice he was selected by the Rockies to represent Colorado in the Futures game. He was a midseason and end-of-season All-Star multiple times, California League Player of the Week, Player of the Month, Organizational All-Star, you name it. This is back when the Cal League was high A and not low A. He finally debuts in 2019 in Philadelphia. Shoulder injury limits his first 2 years to 32 games. He begins 2021 on the IL. Doesn't hit his first big league home run until that 3rd season. Again, 32 games the first 2 years. So that's not much of a first 2 years, quote unquote. But he doesn't hit his first big league home run until June against the Oakland A's of all teams. And then his 2nd career home run, also a pinch hit homer. Only player in Rockies history to have his first 2 home runs be pinch hit homers. Got 100 games under his belt in 2021, batted .284, 102 OPS plus, and then 2022, the Brendan Rodgers breakout. He ends April batting .078 and a .270 OPS. Folks, if you're listening to this, you could have a .270 OPS. I really think you could. But after April ends, turn the calendar, turn the page, you name it, Brendan Rodgers is legitimately one of the best second basemen in the National League. He hits .286 from May 1st until game 162. Has a 20-game hit streak, 8th longest in team history. Has a 3-homer game on June 1st against the Marlins, and the 3rd one was a walk-off. Believe it or not, it happened before for the Rockies. Todd Hollandsworth, 2001. He's a Silver Slugger finalist in 2022, wins the Gold Glove Award at second base, joining Eric Young Sr., DJ LeMahieu as the only second baseman to win a Gold Glove for the Rockies, and his value is at its peak. It's not as high as it was when he was selected 3rd overall in 2015, but it was his highest in years. And in fact, I think you could make the case that Rodgers did have perhaps more value than he did when he was drafted. Let's not forget, when guys are drafted, and this is what I'm going to talk about next, when guys are drafted, they are still suspects. Yes, you hope that they're prospects and they become something great and grand. And they become all-stars. And they have that hype. Because there's that potential. They're still young. They're developing. Sky's the limit. And then once they reach the majors, you kind of know what you've got. And guys really don't get much better in the major league level. They just kind of stay the same and then they deteriorate. As I'm going to get to in just a moment, there's plenty of guys who have been drafted over the years, including many in the first round that never even reached the majors. So despite being selected 3rd overall in 2015, there would probably be a lot of people where if you created a weird dimension in which the high schooler, Brendan Rodgers, is there with the guy that played in 2022 for the Rockies, there would be a lot of GMs that would prefer the more finished product rather than the prospect/suspect that might never become anything. So despite that value that he had after 2022, Rockies, headed for their first 100-loss season, hold on to him. Now, on one hand, you say, well, they didn't know they were going to lose 100 games in 2023. No. But didn't they know they were going to be bad? I think so. January of 2023, when Dick Monfort spoke in Greeley and said, yeah, I think we have a chance to maybe be 500. I don't think he had that many qualifiers giving him the benefit of the doubt, but he said, yeah, we might be able to be around 500. Went viral. Because people said, no, you don't have a good grip. You don't have a good grasp on this team, on its It's true potential. And look, potential is not if everyone is healthy and everyone plays their best. That's not potential. That's not potential. Because if that's true, again, the Rockies would still be behind many, many more teams than not. So you can't just say if everyone is healthy, if everybody plays their best, if everybody develops like we would cross our fingers and pray to the baseball gods above, even if they did that, it's going to happen for other teams too. And it doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. Guys get hurt. Guys get injured. Look at Atlanta this year. Spencer Strider, Ronald Acuna Jr., just done, gone. And that's just a year down for Atlanta. That's it. It's a footnote in their franchise history. So they hold on to Brendan Rodgers. Maybe to get more at the trade deadline in 2023 after that great season in 2022 after the breakout. Maybe, but this is a guy with an injury history. He ended 2022 on the IL with a hamstring strain. If you're going nowhere, the only way that you can get somewhere when you're going nowhere is to look ahead into the future, is to plan ahead and to plan wisely. There were some conversations about a deal possibly where Rodgers would have been traded for an Edward Cabrera from the Miami Marlins. Never came to fruition, really. I don't think those conversations got very deep. But 2023, that value, that asset, it plummeted. Injures his left shoulder now on a diving play in spring training, which some people gave him crap over, but he's getting ready for a season. He's got to dive. He's got to know his body. He's got to do those things. It was an accident. It happened. Again, if you want to say that he's an injury-prone player, that's fine. But saying he shouldn't be diving in a spring training game, no. It was a reasonable dive. He was going to make a play that he made tens of 20 times over in 2022. It's one of the reasons why he won the Gold Glove. He was great on diving plays. He was great going to his left. That's what happened. Shoulder issue. Plays 46 games. In 2024, he plays 135 games. You know, a decent season. Good, not great. He's now going to need to prove that he wasn't a product of Coors Field after batting .328 in 2024 at Coors, 7th best in the majors. I think a lot of people will, again, he's not a disappointment. And I understand if you out there are disappointed that the Rockies could have, should have, would have gotten more for the 3rd overall pick in 2015. But consider this. Of the 49 players drafted by the Rockies in either the first or supplemental first round in Rockies history, Brendan Rodgers ranks 11th in terms of wins above replacement, in terms of BWAR, Baseball Reference's version of WAR. He's 4th in terms of position players, behind Helton, Tulo, and Trevor Story, Nolan Arenado, 2nd round pick. Rodgers was much better than Ian Stewart, Jason Nix, Forrest Wall, David Dahl, Tyler Nevin, Kyle Parker, Chris Nelson. Again, in terms of wins above replacement. Have you ever heard of Jeff Winchester, Tim Wheeler, Mark Mangum, Casey Weathers, all first round or supplemental first round picks by the Rockies that never reached the majors? If you want to look at the 2015 MLB Draft, the guy that went right behind Rodgers, number 4 pick, Dylan Tate, still hasn't done much. Tyler J., Carson Palmer. 9 of the 42 players taken in the first or supplemental first round of the 2015 MLB Draft never reached the majors. When just looking at the 33 who have reached the majors, out of those 42 from 2015, Rodgers is 15th when compared to those, which means he was still better than 27 others. If you're disappointed because you're thinking about the what could have been, yeah, you certainly could. La Esquina del Diamante. Same happened with CJ Cron's value in 22. and Elias Diaz's value in 2023, and Cal Quantrill's value in 2024, and John Gray and Trevor Story in 2021. Tale as old as time. Overvaluing your players and perhaps not having a good rapport with other teams to work out these kind of deals. Rockies do have a good rapport with some teams out there. That's why you typically see them making trades with the Guardians, the Angels, the Reds. There's still 26 other teams out there you got to work with and try to make your team better and not worry about making the other team better. Sometimes maybe taking 3/4 on the dollar, taking less than what you would like, is better than eventually getting nothing. That's how you can start building a relationship, to say, you know what, not crazy about this deal, but I'm going to do it. And hopefully that builds up a little bit of a rapport. And you pick up the phone next time I try calling, rather than you avoid a team because the way they operate, because they pull guys off the board. Daniel Bard in 2022. If you're pulling guys off the board, teams aren't not necessarily going to want to communicate and contact with you. They might do the bare minimum to touch base, but we've seen it in the past. Jorge De La Rosa for Eduardo Rodriguez in 2016 gets down to the last minute, and according to Peter Gammons, owner Dick Monfort squashed that deal. 24th hour. Nope, we're actually not going to do it. I know a lot of people invested a lot of time in trying to work this out, but I'm not going to do it for a player that's going to be a free agent at the end of the year that I could re-sign if I wanted to for 2017. So for 2 months of one player for 6+ years of a top prospect, the owner cancels that deal. And that's why some teams haven't always done business with the Colorado Rockies. In the chat, 50% of something is better than 100% of nothing. The math checks out on that. The math absolutely maths. Sean Keeler wrote this for the Denver Post recently. Great quote from Hall of Fame general manager and executive Branch Rickey. Forgot about this quote. Trade a player a year early rather than a year late. Truer words have never been spoken. And I think for a lot of fans, the big what if. I mean, Dick Monfort said it in the media availability after the trade of Nolan Arenado that, yeah, you know what, letting LeMahieu go was a mistake. Why'd they let him go? Because they had a top prospect in Brendan Rodgers to take LeMahieu's place. That was going to be a lot cheaper. And some of the conversations that were going down that offseason had to do with Brendan Rodgers going to the Miami Marlins for JT Realmuto. Had the Rockies traded their top prospect in Brendan Rodgers in the 2018-2019 offseason and acquired 2 years of JT Realmuto, the Rockies would have had an infield with Realmuto at catcher, Arenado at third base, Story at shortstop. You bring back DJ LeMahieu now at second base, and now Ryan McMahon is playing first base. And now maybe you get that 30 home run power. You're telling me that team doesn't go to the postseason in 2019 and 2020? They absolutely do. You're telling me that the Rockies don't have a chance to win the World Series in 2020, a 60-game shortened season? Of course, we had no idea a pandemic was coming. But in a 60-game season with that infield, Realmuto, McMahon, LeMahieu, Story, Arenado, Charlie Blackmon still in his prime, tail end of it. You're telling me that team isn't going to possibly make a deep run in 2020? Its fourth consecutive year going to the postseason? That's why I think a lot of Rockies fans are chagrined. I'll phrase it that way. Can't say I blame you. But Brendan Rodgers, good Rocky, not a bust. By far, not a bust. If you want to be personally disappointed, that's fine. If you want to be disappointed with the organization, again, that's where the timelines, that's when being able to communicate is going to have a major impact. Brendan Rodgers' value on November 22nd was such that he got non-tendered. And that makes sense. July of 2024, less sense. After that 2022 season where he's a Silver Slugger Award finalist and a Gold Glove Award winner, the least sense of them all. If you're going nowhere, stop and change direction. You need to rebuild and reroute. That should be the new word. Fine, you don't want to say rebuild. How about reroute? How about get a different game plan? So if that's what you're going to be upset about that. But Brendan Rodgers, really good Rocky. Still a really good Rocky. Some great memories. And I wish him nothing but the best of luck. Same thing with Cal Quantrill. He was not long for the Rockies world. 3.77 ERA after his July 4th start. Had a stretch of 8 quality starts and 9 outings from April to the end of May. Was second in the National League among pitchers, according to Baseball Reference's version of WAR, at the end of June, 3.2 B-WAR. Had a 3.47 ERA at Coors Field for much of the season. And while some predictive metrics suggest he wasn't as good as his ERA, it is crazy to say that there were no takers for Cal Quantrill. That's a stretch. We don't know. I wasn't in those rooms. But to say that no team would have been interested in Cal Quantrill, sure, they would have been lowball offer saying, hey, we know that it's somewhat of luck. Okay, but what are you going to offer? You're not going to offer me a bucket of balls. You're going to offer me something. And because we know he's going to be making $9 million and still don't have a TV deal, didn't magically pop up. We're going to have to cut some payroll. Yeah, absolutely. Let's make that deal now rather than try to make it in the offseason when other teams are going to know you need to cut payroll. And when other teams see that Cal Quantrill is getting $9 million, and even after you get rid of him, your rotation is still making over $46 million. Let's not forget about that. Kyle Freeland, $16 million. Antonio Senzatella, $12 million. These are their 2025 salaries. Herman Marquez, $10 million. Gomber is going to make between $5 and $6 mil. Feltner, he's not making a lot, between $2 and $3 million. There was a time in which the Rockies didn't have any starters that were making that much money back in 2017, 2018. So the Rockies need to cut payroll. Teams know it. You've got zero leverage. And that's why there was no trade for Rodgers, no trade for Quantrill. No, go ahead, fine. Then you cut him, and then we'll negotiate a deal with that guy or someone else like him, because there's a lot of options that are available out there. Will the rotation survive? Absolutely. Is it weaker now without Cal Quantrill? Yes. But I think they're going to be all right. Got an article coming out on Just Baseball coming up this week. Freeland, Gomber, Ryan Feltner. 1, 2, 3. Okay. But then you should be getting a full season of Antonio Senzatella and Herman Marquez. It's 5 in your rotation right there. And then you got the prospects. Then you got your Anthony Molina, Chase Dollander, Carson Palmquist, Sean Sullivan, Bradley Blaylock, Tanner Gordon. You've got options. You've got depth. Solid depth. Rockies need aces. But they at least have depth now for the first time since 2020, 2021. Speaking of the Wayback Machine, we'll get to that in a second. But a couple takes on MVP voting. Judge and Ohtani, both unanimous MVPs. Ohtani, second player in MLB history to win MVP in both leagues. Frank Robinson, the only other. I think it was 61 for the Reds and then 65 for the Orioles after they thought he was too old. They wanted to trade him a year early rather than a year too late, and Frank Robinson made them pay. But again, still a good trade for the Reds. Ezequiel Tovar ended up earning 2 votes. They were both from Colorado writers, a 9th and a 10th place vote. Tovar finishes 19th with Paul Skeens and Teoscar Hernandez, second youngest Rocky to ever earn an MVP vote. Tulo in 2007, 22 years old, just a week shy of his 23rd birthday. Tovar turned 23 in August. So just a little bit older when the season ended. Last player to earn an MVP vote for Colorado. No one earned one in 2023. No one earned one in 2021. Believe it or not, it was Daniel Bard in 2022. He did get a 10th place vote. So we had 2 out of 3 years, 21 and 23, no MVP votes. The last time a Rockies player earned an MVP vote from somebody outside of Colorado, Trevor Story in 2020. Hard times. And if you've been listening to me since that long, you know I've been talking about this. It can be fun. It can be fun looking through purple tinted glasses. I do it from time to time because it's fun. But reality is not the same as those purple tinted glasses. You got to take them off and really evaluate things properly and fairly. And I think that's why everyone who's listening to this right now, either on YouTube or on the podcast, it's because you know that I'm telling the truth. I'm going to tell you both sides. I might tell you where I think things are going, but I'm not just going to say what I want to happen. It's not my job. Unbiased with Patrick Lyons. Is that a show, Unbiased? Probably. Reds Royals finalized that trade I discussed last week. Brady Singer to the Reds. Jonathan India and Joey Wiemer to the Royals. Both Singer and India, former teammates for the University of Florida, have 2 years remaining before they hit free agency. India set to make $5 million, so a little bit less than Rodgers. He's been worth 7 B-WAR over the last 4 seasons. Rodgers, not too far from that. The numbers are very similar between India and Rodgers. But the Reds sweetening the deal a little bit with Joey Wiemer, who they got in the Frankie Montas deal. So they're throwing a prospect in on top of it to bolster their rotation, to get something done. And it's reasons like this why Brendan Rodgers didn't get traded, or why the Rockies had difficulty dealing him, is because there were other options available out there for teams that were cheaper and just a better fit. So did Brendan Rodgers get non-tendered because he's the 31st best second baseman in baseball? Absolutely not. No. Contracts are an important part of the evaluation process and evaluating players. What is this guy worth? Not just their contract, but how much better are they than their contract, and how much better are they than the other options available out there? And if you don't play your hand right, as we saw in the chat, you get 100% of nothing. Wouldn't you rather get 50% of something? Hopefully you're getting 100% of something with me here on the Rockies Insider, at Rockies Insider, at Patrick D. Lyons, or at Patrick D. Lyons MLB. Yes, Blue Sky. I'm over there. Rockies Insider over there. Make sure you are checking that out. Going to be on a couple shows this week as you head towards Thanksgiving. Appreciate you sticking by this extended episode. Love the momentum. Love the passion. Thanks for showing up, jumping in the chat. Diamante, Jonathan, appreciate it. Love the momentum, but you know what I love more? Is the momentum I get from my next show. So naturally, I'll talk to you then.